You are nostalgic for a place you've never known. Homesick for a world that might not even exist. It's a lonely feeling, but you're not the only one. I feel it too, the sense that the possibilities of the future have been shattered and stolen from us. Now, one of the last refuges of human creativity is a vision of the past that might only exist in our collective imaginations. And the future seems to be on indefinite hold. This reality might fill you with despair, but don't lose hope. The very fact that you're able to sense the untapped potential of the past is proof that there's still hope for what's to come. By the end of 2016, things were going downhill, fast. The foundations of the old order were unraveling. The world as we knew it was falling apart. It was in this moment of future shock, this moment of supreme dread for what's just around the corner, that I heard a nostalgic sound from out of the past. A vision beckoning me towards pastel-splashed landscapes, glittering megacities, and an endless highway baking in the summer sun. Here is music, both achingly familiar and yet totally alien. A sound draped in the melodies and production affects of decades past, yet also unmistakably a product of the present moment. Here, at long last, was a destination on a road I didn't even know I had been traveling. The rise of a totally new genre of music, one that remixes a sublime and sunny past for the cold and uncertain times ahead of us. This is a story about a lost utopia, our hunger for redemption, and how this dynamic has given rise to the sense of collective grief we all share. This is city pop and future funk. One of the great ironies of pop music is that long after an iconic artist or group falls out of fashion, they often have a way of finding a new lease on life through the music of small, experimental, or independent artists. Phil Collins was one of the biggest pop music stars in the world in the 1980s. But by the year 2000, popular sentiment had turned against him completely.
Look, I used to be in a band too, Genesis, but all those bastards did was hold me back and hold me back. But then finally I went solo, and that's when I started writing really great songs.
To this day, people still seem to think that quoting that scene from American Psycho is the height of comedy.
Do you like Phil Collins?
But then, starting in the late 2000s, a new generation of independent and underground musicians began drawing inspiration from the iconic tunes and tones of the Genesis Collins back catalog.
She's alright, I'm alright, we're alright, you can't go back.
And before we knew it, Phil Collins was cool again.
Remember early on, y'all ain't treat me all the same, no. Used to question why the brothers even rock with me, foe. Remember y'all wonder, used to wonder about one.
From the mainstream to the underground to the mainstream once more. The past is always with us, always present. I saw the past come alive again in a YouTube thumbnail. Bright pinks and seafoam greens, and a twisting ribbon of highway rising atop a glittering skyline. The title was only 3 words long. Now and forever. Before I even understood what I was listening to, I knew I needed more of this music immediately. I plunged down the YouTube rabbit hole, absorbing as much as I could about the up-and-coming artists and DJs who were spearheading this new sound, dubbed future funk. Producers like Macross8299, Young Bay, Night Tempo, and Desired. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this new style of music is its sample-heavy nature. The name future funk is a little bit ironic, considering how it draws almost exclusively on the freeform funk and disco records of 70s and 80s Japan, a genre known as city pop. City pop has its roots in the US military's post-World War II occupation of Japan. Bars and clubs catering to American soldiers helped popularize classic disco and funk music, despite Japan's notorious indifference to foreign culture. The early 1970s saw the rise of Japanese folk pop artists like Happy End, Hachimitsu Pai, and Sugar Babe, whose members came of age during the post-war occupation. These groups were instrumental to the formation of this new sound with their genre-defying fusions of soul, funk, and singer-songwriter pop. These acts were also decidedly niche and underground. They stood well apart from the mainstream Japanese rock of the era, which favored classic, blues-style rock and roll. This new sound had its roots in American mass culture and yet was still unmistakably Japanese. Lyrics about living in bright new cities commingled with a mournful nostalgia for a fast-fading vision of life in rural Japan. From the beginning, city pop was defined by this dance between the past and the present. The highly advanced electronics industry of 1970s Japan gave rise to technological marvels like personal computers, the early internet, portable stereos, pocket radios, and Sony's iconic Walkman. It also brought financial prosperity to a country that had been all but destroyed a mere 2 decades prior. For a time, Japan had one of the highest standards of living of any nation in the world. The bustling 1970s gave way to a dreamlike, optimistic, and euphoric 1980s of splendor and hyper-consumerism, what we now call the bubble era. There's a lot more to explore here, so if you're interested in learning more about this period of Japanese history, check out this video on the legendary anime film Perfect Blue that I worked on with Ragnaroks. As city pop emerged from the musical underground, it became the definitive soundtrack for this new age. The sound appropriated many familiar tropes of Western funk and jazz: four-to-the-floor disco beats, brassy and rhythmic horns, and funk syncopation, all layered over complex and improvisational melodies. This was pitch-perfect music for a modern, technological paradise, a sound that was at once familiar and yet also achingly nostalgic. It was, to quote one of the quintessential city pop artists of the era, a perfect plastic love.
I'm just playing games. I know that's plastic love. I know that plastic love. Dancing a plastic beat. Another morning come.
The city pop approach to production and songwriting is totally earnest and heart-on-sleeve sincere, reflecting the country's prosperity and newfound cosmopolitanism, and the belief that things would only keep getting better. The genre finally entered the Japanese mainstream in 1980 with Tatsuro Yamashida's hit single Ride on Time. Yamashita was one half of the band Sugar Babe before starting his solo career, and he quickly became one of city pop's foundational artists, releasing million-selling albums like Melodies and For You. The 80s also saw many female artists break out of the girl group mold and become city pop stars in their own right. Iconic singers like Miki Matsubara, Junko Ohashi, Tomoko Aran, and the author of Plastic Love herself, Maria Takeuchi. Fun fact, Tatsuro Yamashita and Maria Takeuchi got married in 1982, and they're still together today. But if city pop could be said to have a breakout moment, it was Akira Terao's 1981 single Ruby no Yubiwa, or Ruby Ring. All of the definitive sonic elements of city pop can be heard in this track. Slinky guitar riffs, wild and effervescent synthesizers, and classic syncopated funk rhythms. The song's mournful lyrics tell the tale of a dapper young city slicker reminiscing about losing the love of his life and the ring she left behind. The record was an instant classic, selling nearly 2 million copies in its first year and cementing city pop's status as mainstream Japanese music. And the genre's sleek, futuristic sound was made possible thanks to new technology like pulse code modulation, or PCM, and similar advances in digital audio recording. The booming economy of 1980s Japan made it that much easier for artists to secure major funding from labels, and city pop became some of the most cutting-edge music made anywhere in the world. But technology influenced more than just the recording process. It also left its mark on the form of city pop, how it was played and where it was heard. The rise of city pop coincided with numerous technological breakthroughs in mobile stereo systems, especially car stereos. It's why so much of the imagery and iconography of this music might already be keenly familiar to you. Cars and pedestrians gliding effortlessly through nighttime cityscapes underneath a canopy of dazzling neon. Well, that's because this music was recorded with car stereos and portable radios in mind. In much the same way that the synthesizer-driven pop music of the 1980s US and UK was informed by the technology of the era, so too was city pop. But by the early 90s, the Japanese dream of hyper-capitalist dominance vanished, almost overnight. The bubble era ended, and the Japanese economy came crashing down with it, leading to what historians call Japan's lost decade of the 1990s, a decade-long depression that the country still hasn't fully recovered from. The dreamy and ethereal optimism of city pop had no place in this brutal new reality. The genre quickly fell out of favor among younger listeners who could no longer relate to such carefree music or the bygone era it represented. But that wasn't the end of city pop. If, like so many Westerners, you grew up during the Japanese pop culture explosion of the 90s and 2000s, this music has an instantly recognizable, even nostalgic quality to it. You see, city pop artists were responsible for some of the most iconic anime theme music of all time, like Hiroko Moriguchi's rendition of the Zeta Gundam opening anthem. Or, like Smile Bomb by Matsuko Mawatari, the theme music for Yu Yu Hakusho. Or Miho Morikawa's Positive, one of Ranma 1/2's ending theme songs. It's a thread that carries on to this very day. City pop godfather Tatsuro Yamashita himself wrote and performed the ending theme song of the 2018 anime film Mirai no Mirai.
My baby go, cute, cute, 構図して cute, cute 抱きしめたら sweet, sweet 甘い匂いがする
And the sprawling influence of city pop isn't confined solely to anime. Take a listen to 1983's Summer Breeze by Piper. Does it remind you of anything? And speaking of Mario, how about the World 3 theme music of Super Mario World 3? If you slow things down a bit, you just might recognize the soulful melodies of Yes, Tatsuro Yamashita, from the 1982 single Morning Glory. I could keep listing examples, but maybe you're starting to get the picture already. Anime and video game fans already have a deep and abiding connection to this music, even if we can't exactly put a name to it. Of course, anime and video games were some of the only ways that Western audiences could be exposed to city pop in the first place. Big-name artists were never given a second thought by major labels outside of Japan, since it was assumed that there would be little appetite internationally for such a distinctly Japanese genre of music. Even Tatsuro Yamashita, the godfather of city pop, has never had an official album release in the West. Until very recently, your only choice was to scour YouTube for bootleg uploads, but too often they'd be hit with copyright claims and be made unavailable in Western countries, or just disappear entirely. For the longest time, if you were interested in this music, your only choice was to pay way too much to import physical records from Japan.
Let's dance, baby. Let's dance, baby. Let's dance, baby. Let's dance, baby. Let's dance, baby.
But it's not that way anymore. City pop began to resurface in underground and enthusiast music scenes in Japan, and was widely sampled by artists in the Shibuya-kei genre of electronic music. But this time around, Shibuya-kei music started to gain traction in the West, and some albums were picked up for release by big indie labels like Sub Pop and Matador Records.
Must be talking to an angel. 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 Must be talking to an angel.
And the popularity of Shibuya-kei helped give rise to what we know as vaporwave, inspiring a new generation of electronic composers and remix artists in the West. And in turn, taking a page from the sample-heavy and extremely online nature of vaporwave, the future funk genre soon rose to prominence and used city pop records as direct inspiration, visually, aesthetically, and musically. With future funk, the past has come alive again. Classic city pop tunes like Junko Yogami's Bay City are reconfigured, recontextualized, and given a new lease on life, as in Young Bay's Bay City Rollas. By the way, can we just stop for a moment and acknowledge the fact that Young Bay is Bay? The Japanese word Natsukashi describes a very specific emotion of yearning for fond memories and times gone by. The nearest English equivalent for this word is probably nostalgia, but even that doesn't properly capture its dimensions. The word Natsukashi is more about the feeling or the sensation itself, not the place or the time. In other words, you might feel a sense of Natsukashi for a place that never even existed. In a world facing social disruption, rising authoritarianism, and ecological collapse, history has come to feel like an unnecessary burden, a discarded relic that is no longer worthy of our respect or contemplation. And what results is our perpetual state of future shock, the state of constant stress and pressure arising from the rapid changes we're witnessing all around us. But another world is possible if we take to heart the lessons history is trying to teach us. And there are lessons to be learned from the melodies of Japanese pop music, just as there are in a history book on the bubble era. The interplay between past and present reminds us that history is not a tale of uninterrupted progress, advancing linearly from one moment to the next, always marching forward. The story of human existence is one of repetition, of looping back on past events, and of the echoes that ring down through the ages. Take heart from what came before us, and from the joy of life-affirming art being transmitted from one generation to the next. The beautiful melodies of city pop and future funk are a reminder that new creative energy and a renewed hope for the future are always waiting for us if we know where to look for them. And it's yet another reason why I'm still dreaming in neon.
Nanatsu no umi kara atsumatte kuru megami tachi no doresu ni fureta totan ni hirogaru sekai wa fushigi na kagayaki yo hanachi nagara kokoro eto shinobikomu.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, share it with a friend. This video is made possible through the crowdfunding website Patreon and the generous support I get from my audience. So thank you, sincerely, to everyone who believes in me enough to chip in, like the fine folks whose names you're seeing right now. If you find value or entertainment in my work and you want to help me grow the channel, consider making a pledge. Even a buck or two helps, and it means more than you know. These videos take a long time to write, produce, and edit, and I'm always grateful for the support and encouragement I get from everyone. If you're interested in getting even more familiar with the music of City Pop, head over to my Patreon page. There's a public post there with a recommendations list of the genre's greatest hits. And I'm going to follow that up soon with another list of future funk required listening. I know I took a long hiatus over the summer as I got bogged down with DMCA BS, but don't worry, I'm still here, and there's more on the way soon. The next deep dive is shaping up to be another massive undertaking. So before that, I'm going to do something a little bit different for this channel and try out a new format. Stay tuned. Thanks again. And Dreaming in Neon will return.